I think it's true to say that in the last 4 years, this is a relatively new field that journalism has had to deal with. So a lot of the kind of research hasn't quite been done yet, and we're still learning a lot on the fly, I suppose. The Taos Under, however, have done research in the last couple of years which suggests that graphic imagery and the viewing of graphic imagery by journalists can have a severe impact on, rates of depression, alcohol use, and things like that. I think here in Storyful, there's a couple of things we have that help us as journalists. One is a very supportive team environment and a very supportive team generally. It's a very tight team, a relatively small team, and I think the support offered by each journalist really makes a big difference when you come into work in the morning, to know that there's a team of people here who are dealing with the same thing you are on a day-to-day basis. They know they've seen some of the worst things that you can possibly see, and that kind of team spirit, I think, is definitely a big thing and helps us, deal with these issues. And I think the second thing we've done, and I think it's good policy for any newsroom to follow, particularly any newsroom that has a digital or social media team, is to offer counselling services gratis for those employees. So at Storyful, we have a free counselling service provided for employees if they feel they need it. And I think those two things have helped us a lot, but there's no doubt that it can have a serious personal impact, particularly if you're reviewing it day in and day out.
2 years ago, I was at work, and then I just read on the news that there is bombing and missile landed in the Wadi Zira'a, and the Wadi Zira'a is literally 200 meters away from my parents' house. So I picked the phone, I talked to my dad, and I was like, Dad, I was crying, are you okay? He said, oh, don't worry, we are okay. On the phone, I could hear the second missile. Like, it was one of the worst moments, I'd say, in my life, really. It was so tense. But I mean, I always dream, honestly, I always dream, I always listen, hear the bombing in my ears, even there's no bombing here, but it's always constantly in my head. And not only me, I think every Syrian.
Apparently it's just a forced landing. I'll see if there's anything. I doubt there is very much.
Vicarious trauma is just part of the job here at Storyful. We witness things every day that are disturbing. We witness things every day that are enlightening, but it is the disturbing things that stick with you. When I think about it, in my first week on the job, the Paris attacks had occurred, and we were dealing with the fallout of that, and hearing people's record of the day and seeing footage from inside the Bataclan was something I took home with me. It's something that is easy to plough on with when you're at work, but it's something that has tended to rear its head when I'm at home, when I might be doing something completely normal like cooking or talking to my partner, and they'll come back, and I found the best thing to do is actually talk about them the moment that they pop up. If it's an ISIS beheading that an image comes into my mind, just to talk about it immediately, get it out of the system. That's the easiest way I've found to absolve myself of that horrible feeling that these are humans that are hurting humans. That's one of the hardest things to come to terms with, is we are a hemisphere away often, and these horrendous things are actually happening. It's not just a video from another world away, it's happening.
The amount of content we look at, particularly from the Middle East, Islamic State, I joined at a time when Islamic State were putting out all these videos of Westerners being beheaded. They were released, towards the evening on a Friday, just when you were settling in for a weekend, and then you had this image in your brain, which can be hard to get out. But over time, and the same goes with Syria bombings, images of children being pulled from rubble. I've seen it so many times now that you do start to separate yourself from it. It's not that you care less, it's just that you need to do the work in order to make other people care. And it's been quite frustrating, irrationally frustrating, or maybe perhaps, but when you try to talk to other people about it and you want to share this sort of footage with them, or share these videos, even on Facebook, or saying, look at this, this is what's happening in Syria, and we're here at home worrying about taxes and whatever else, and stuff that seems banal and trivial. and you feel like if you could try and share these videos, people might have a better understanding of refugees and the migration crisis in the Mediterranean. We see thousands of people being rescued, you know, in one day in the Mediterranean. Just last week, 4,500 in a day, and that story's gone. We saw the boy, Ireland Curdy, on the beach, and it all flares up, and it was great for rescue efforts. MOAS, one of the rescue services in the Mediterranean, received a 15-fold increase in their donations the day following that photograph, but that eventually fades away. So it's hard watching this stuff and putting it out and wanting it to have an effect, and it goes nowhere.
It's seeing, it's such a desperate journey, and seeing families, seeing mums and dads and little kids just getting on boats and going across and arriving on the beaches of Greece. Like it's a really tough story to digest over and over again. So I think for me that's the first time that I've had a story that has really affected me, I guess. As soon as I get home, I have a hot shower and I just like let the day go. I cook dinner. I talk to my husband. I talk to people who aren't in the media at all. I also do lots of exercise, and I play field hockey, which is really nerdy and really weird, but it's a really good way to just let the day go and just sort of have a normal life. Otherwise, you're carrying around some really tough images that aren't really healthy.
I think one of my first experiences with vicarious trauma, it was kind of before it was known as that. It was also with my first experience with user-generated content. I was working on stories about the terrorist attacks of September 11th as an intern. It was one of the first big stories I ever worked on, and someone was passing around my college campus on a closed network a video that had supposedly been shot in New York from an apartment that looked like debris falling from the burning towers. And you realize when you're watching it, along with the person who was filming it, that it wasn't debris, but it was people who were jumping from the higher floors. I must have watched that video 100 times. I don't think that's an exaggeration. For some reason, I just really felt the need to process that and relive it over and over again, and putting myself through that over and over again. And, you know, I eventually had to write about that, but it was something I wasn't really prepared for, because you could tell the person filming it wasn't prepared for that either. And I think now it's something that we see all the time, of things that, you know, you go into a video not knowing what's going to come out of it. But I'll never forget that one. I mean, I was 21, and I think I still think about that video all the time. And I often just wonder if I thought back then it couldn't possibly get any worse. But we know by now that it can.
I think for me, trauma is more of a slow burn working as a journalist. It's that point where you've been sifting through information all day, and it's been coming from all points of the world. And you sit back and you sort of go, oh my God, everything is so messed up. That's where I think I've seen trauma come out in my time working as a journalist. It was right around the time of the Orlando shootings. That same week, we'd been seeing stuff come in from Orlando that was absolutely horrific. Like, it was just gut-wrenching stuff. And then the next day, I came into work after having dealt with that all day, and there was a stabbing of this couple in France, two policemen, a husband and a wife. The guy who'd done it was filming this Facebook Live video in the house straight after, and the child was still there in the house at the time. And I think that was the point for me where I kind of just went like, oh my goodness, you've got these, like, you know, polar, complete different sides of the globe, and then just these sort of traumatic incidents are just occurring like all over.
I guess over the years I've built up, I suppose, a resilience and a tolerance for the more graphic content. One story that I go back to really is the chemical attacks in 2013. There's one particular video that sticks with me all the time. It's this father, and without context, you would in the first few seconds of the video, you would just see a father crying and hugging his 2 children. And after a couple of seconds, both of the children's heads fall backwards. And, you know, it's quite obvious at that stage that they're both deceased. Probably one of the more graphic videos that you will see, especially, you know, anything to do with children is always, you know, can be taxing and fatiguing at times. But it was later in that day where you saw bedrooms, you know, with bodies, you know, anywhere from the ages of a couple of weeks old to, you know, 12 and 13, you know, kids who had nothing at all to do with what's going on in Syria, and lying there in bedrooms with numbers across their foreheads. You know, if we don't show that content, and if we don't, you know, present it in some form to the general public, that's the day we're not journalists. That's the day where we're working to an agenda.
Everything changed for me when I came back from maternity leave in 2014 at the start of the Israeli bombardment of Gaza. That was a particularly difficult time. We were just being bombarded by endless videos of civilians in difficulty, children suffering terribly brutal content. What I find interesting about the vicarious trauma debate is that experts now say that what will help a journalist or anybody on the front line or anyone who's witnessing difficult content, what will help them along the way is the feeling that what they're doing is making a difference. That's not always an easy thing to feel when you're working in modern media, but I must say that from my perspective, the feeling that we as a group of journalists can work well to verify content, to find out if it's real or not, to get to the heart of the story, and working well as a team together, that has really helped me come to terms with the content that we're actually seeing. And again, I guess that's what you want to be as a journalist. You want to be the person who shines the light into the dark corners.
One thing that you do get a lot of exposure to working in Storyful is user-generated content directly from the ground, like just shortly after a few seconds, you know, after bombs, let's say, may go off. I find that with the kind of life that I have, you know, in Dublin, it's quite easy to go and to, you know, shut that out, which maybe isn't necessarily a good thing because that can lead to a desensitizing effect. But I find that, you know, that prolonged exposure, that can be very draining. Like maybe one memory that really stands with me, but was around the time of Operation Protective Edge, because like I was following around that time a lot of the human rights organizations in Israel, and I also saw like the user-generated content that was being created as well as the live updates from Harrods. But you know, like it was literally like watching an entire war unfold on social media.
The trouble we have is becoming desensitized to some of the graphic images. So let's say the first time I saw a beheading, it was a bit shocking. And you tell yourself, this isn't a movie, this is real life, like that person is actually dead. But here's the thing, when you're immersed in it, you're not seeing anyone around, you're going frame by frame, it becomes almost a forensic approach to it. Things become, not the video itself, but just it's pixels. And you're just trying to verify what's happening. So, you know, while I'm processing it, it's shocking, but I have to do a job. And I think if you just go about it with more of, the forensic approach, and then when you turn off your computer, I have great colleagues around me that just start having a joke or just talking about your daily life, and that's it. Life returns to normal, you know? And for us here, wherever we are in the newsroom, around the world, whereas for me, it's just realizing, knowing that no matter what I feel, it's nothing compared to what the people on the ground see every day and live every moment. I think it's also important to note that every person has their own way of dealing with things. Just because I don't react a certain way doesn't mean that my other colleagues should act this way or react another way. And that comes back to being prepared when looking at these disturbing images is, you know yourself better than anyone else does. So if you can handle it, if you think you can handle it, then that's one thing. But if you know you can't, or if it's really going to affect you, it's also having the courage to say, I can't. This isn't for the greater good of the company, the organization, or doing justice to the story.
So I think the story that stuck out for me most was the shootings in Paris in November 2015, because a lot of us know the city, we've been there before. So in stories like this where, acts of absolute awful aggression and brutality, it's important to focus on the positive stories, so the people and why they were there. They were out having fun at the Bataclan Theatre or in the Stade de France, things like this, and to focus on these stories rather than the acts of aggression, as I said.
I find it's less the footage but the story that would affect me, especially if it's a story that's particularly affecting the people around me, whether that's in the newsroom or when I come home and my friends are upset around it. And it's more around human rights abuses than anything else, because that's something that we have a chance to prevent happening.
I'm usually not too affected by graphic news footage or by disturbing stories that I might have to write up, but every now and then something might bother me. Most recently, it's been the officer-involved shootings in the United States, the deaths of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. The live stream footage of Philando Castile's death, I had to hub that particular piece of footage, and it did disturb me, and I couldn't stop thinking about it for a while afterwards. And I think one of the things that did help me, and always helps me when I'm dealing with footage of this nature, is to just keep in mind the fact that journalists are really meant to kind of bring order from chaos and to dig deep into these traumatic news events and extract a sense of meaning so that other people don't have to. And keeping that in the back of my head when I write up a story on something like this has enabled me to get through the day and just gain that extra bit of perspective that I need to keep a clear head.
I don't bring it home to me, and I don't find any immediate side effects. For instance, the things you hear about self-medicating, trouble sleeping, trouble switching off, images presenting themselves to the mind, persistently and in a way that's unwelcome. None of that happens to me. So I think from that point of view, I don't think it's affected me. But then there's an unanswerable question about one's let's say mood, one's sort of disposition. How much is this affected by our news, exposure to news, or exposure to images? Would I be a happier person if I was, sealed off in the side of a mountain in a cabin painting pictures or composing songs all day? Possibly yes, but then again possibly no. So it's impossible to tell whether there's more kind of deeper psychological, philosophical implications from this material than simply just immediate kind of off-putting side effects, which I don't experience. But then again, there's, like I said, a deeper possibility around your mood, your disposition, your worldview that possibly is something that's been affected by this kind of material. But that's a fairly difficult question to answer.
I think I naturally detach myself emotionally from what we're working on, mainly because I know that the content has nothing to do with me, the situation has nothing to do with me, and I'd rather think about the people who are involved, the people who are suffering, or the eyewitnesses, the person who filmed it. I find that if I started to make this about me and started to make the feelings I have watching this video about me, I would probably feel quite guilty when I go home, and after watching content like that during the day, I don't think I act any differently. I don't think I have any immediate effects that I know of. I suppose you'd have to ask somebody who knows me.
I wouldn't say the work doesn't affect me, but it tends not to follow me home for the most part. There's a closure that comes from being able to do that verification work and get the permission of the original uploader. I mean, you can just sort of draw a line under a story and move on. That isn't always possible though, and there's a couple of examples that jump out. The shooting of the French police officer Ahmed Mirabet after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, or video showing people trapped on a bus after a bridge collapse in Brazil during the 2014 World Cup. In both of those cases, the original uploaders didn't want to be associated with the videos and later took them down off social media. So rather than feeling like we were helping someone tell their story, suddenly our work felt more like an imposition. And in those cases, the videos stuck with me longer than far worse imagery that I've seen in videos from other stories, just because there wasn't that sense that we had helped someone tell a story and could just draw a line under the story and move on.
I think it's very important for us to know that when we see horrible things online, we have to remember they are tragedies that have happened, and we do not need to replay them over and over again in our heads. Also, we should help each other by not posting graphic content on public channels and supporting each other when we have to watch the ugly side of human nature.
I suppose I haven't seen a good deal of the more graphic material, but certainly working across a number of countries and subject matter types, you come across a whole heap of anger, and you come across some extremely graphic content, but also more, how shall I say, less dramatic, but nevertheless very wearing material just by virtue of seeing disputes, fights at events, people generally being angry at each other, and the cumulative effect of it can be quite wearing, certainly. It's important to try and draw a distinction between working time and non-working time, and try and make sure that you get out, go for a run, try and go for a walk, ensure you've got some sort of pastimes happening outside of working hours. Ensure that you take a break. It can be difficult when news continues to develop, when there continues to be a breaking news story, to know that after a little while you need to get up, take a walk around in the office, ensure you take a little bit of time for lunch to get away from it, even if it's only for a short while, because news doesn't stop, but eventually you will need to.
In my first week at Storyful, I saw a man get buried alive. I saw 2 people jump off a high-rise building, and I saw a suicide bomber turn on his vest in a crowded airport, and I felt nothing. What gets to me, actually, isn't seeing all those graphic things, but this kind of widespread apathy of which it's received by the public. And I think for a lot of storytellers, a lot of people who are out there, especially journalists who are actually there, who choose to be there, and to see that there's not much of a reaction besides a kind of, muted sympathy. I think more than anything, that's disturbing. It's really, really hard for journalists to switch off. I mean, in the same way that doctors don't switch off, policemen don't switch off. We're in a 24/7 news cycle. So at what point do you where's that kind of line of demarcation, But I think you kind of just try to live normally. I mean, just because somebody else is suffering somewhere else doesn't make your life worse. It shouldn't make your life worse. Saying that you should be sad because someone else is sad, it's the same as saying you can't be happy because someone else is happier than you.
I think things are changing now. I think it's really healthy for journos to talk to each other, to, if you're having a tough day or if you've just seen too many, tough images, to have a break, go and have a cup of tea, get some sunshine, have a beer, have a wine, a coffee, and just kind of chat about it. Previously, journos were expected to be so stoic and tough and hard-assed, but I don't think that's the case anymore. And to be a good storyteller, you have to have empathy and a clear mind. So being able to switch off is so, so important, and it's a healthy thing to do.
I suppose that as an editor, it's difficult in the sense that it's hard to gauge how everybody reacts to it, the extent to which individuals are exposed to this kind of material. So the challenge really is to know people's sensitivities, know the extent to which they're dealing with this material, know the extent of the exposure they're dealing with. Then one can hopefully find ways to limit or spread the burden across the team, or even mitigate the burden by removing non-essential viewing, by other filtering mechanisms, because it's important obviously that some of the stuff is seen, but then again it's not always vital that all the stuff is seen. So I think as a team the approach to take is to kind of share the burden as much as possible, and a further difficulty would be that it affects different people differently. So speaking personally, I don't find it terribly upsetting, but of course it is a observed phenomenon. The science is in, as it were. This is a real thing that happens. So from that point of view, we have to be cognizant of that fact, and I think the best way to do that is to just know your staff, know your team, and try and spread the burden.
I always try to encourage people working at Storyful to use the services that are available, and I think it's something we try to flag as early and often as possible, particularly with people who deal with more graphic content than others. And there are some people on the team who tend to be dealing with that kind of content every day. So the few telltale signs are no different to any other kind of signs of depression or anything like that. It's increased absences, lack of enthusiasm, possibly increased alcohol abuse and things like that. And you can spot them coming down the tracks. And I think as a manager or as a member of that team, it's kind of incumbent on you to provide that support and encourage that person to seek help if you believe they need it.